Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the earnings call noise and really pull out the key signals for you.
Exactly.
Today, we're diving into the recent call from Anavex. Our goal is simple. Distill the key takeaways just based on what management discussed about their performance and, what's coming next.
Yeah, think of us as guides, helping you quickly grasp what matters from their financials, the pipeline updates, the whole picture they painted on the call.
Okay, let's jump right in. Financials first. This is for the quarter ending March 31st, 2025, their fiscal Q2.
Right.
What's the headline on the balance sheet?
Okay, so the big takeaway is cash. They reported $115.8 million in cash and equivalents.
Okay.
And importantly, zero debt.
Zero debt. Always nice to hear. And how much cash did they actually, use operations-wise?
Yeah. So cash used in operating activities, let me see. It was $5.9 million for the quarter. That's after, some non-cash working capital bits.
5.9 million burn. So based on that, what kind of runway are they looking at?
They're saying approximately 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah, based on that current rate.
Yeah.
Which, for a biotech at this stage, that's a pretty significant buffer. Gives them flexibility.
Definitely. Take some pressure off near-term financing, I'd imagine.
Exactly.
So where's that cash going? Let's break down the expenses. General and administrative. G&A.
G&A came in at $2.6 million. That was actually down a little from last year's comparable quarter, which was $2.9 million.
Okay, down slightly. And R&D, that's usually the big one for clinical stage companies.
Right. Research and development was $9.9 million. That's up just a hair from $9.7 million last year.
Yeah.
So pretty stable, really reflects the ongoing trial work.
Makes sense. So putting it all together then, the bottom line, net loss.
Net loss reported was $11.2 million, or 13 cents per share.
Okay.
So financially, the picture seems to be, careful spending, strong cash position, long leash to hit those clinical goals.
Right. A solid foundation. Okay, let's get into the real deep dive now. The business updates, pipeline progress. What was the main focus?
Well, the overarching theme was advancing their portfolio. These are non-invasive targeted compounds. Upstream precision medicine is the term they use.
Upstream, meaning hitting the disease process earlier.
Sort of, yeah. Hitting key targets earlier in the cascade. And the big focus areas they kept coming back to were Alzheimer's disease and schizophrenia.
Okay, let's start with Alzheimer's. That's their lead compound, right? Blackine. AVXL.
That's the one. And they specifically mentioned feedback they're getting from neurologists.
Oh, yeah. What kind of feedback?
Doctors apparently favor treatments that are convenient. Oral pills, things you don't need complex logistics for, either assessment or giving the drug.
Right. That makes sense. Less burden.
Exactly. And that ties right into the data they presented recently. In April, at the ADPD conference, they showed open label extension data for Blackine.
Open label extension. So patients already on the drug continuing treatment.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the key finding they highlighted was continued clinically meaningful benefit for early AD patients over the long haul.
Continued benefit. How long are we talking? Duration is key in AD.
Absolutely. So the data showed once daily oral Blackine significantly slowed clinical decline over 3 years of continuous treatment.
3 years.
And maybe even more importantly, they showed continued clinically meaningful benefit for up to 4 years.
4 years. Wow. How are they measuring that benefit?
They use standard clinical endpoints.
Yeah.
COZT13 and ADCS ADL.
Okay. COZT13, ADCS, ADL. Can you quickly unpack those for us? What do they actually track?
Sure. Think of them as ways to measure how patients are doing. COZT13 looks at both cognition, thinking, memory, and function, like daily tasks. ADCS ADL focuses specifically on those activities of daily living, dressing, eating, hygiene.
Got it.
So seeing continued benefit on both over 4 years is pretty significant. It suggests the drug might be helping with both thinking and daily functioning, which is huge for quality of life.
Definitely. Did they touch on how it might be working, the mechanism?
Yeah, there was mention of a presentation by Professor Marvin Sawback. He talked about Blackine's mechanism at a conference in the Middle East.
And what's the theory?
He highlighted autophagy restoration through upstream sigma-1 activation, referencing their phase 2b3 data.
Okay, autophagy restoration, sigma-1, layman's terms.
Right. Think of autophagy as the cell's cleanup crew. It gets rid of damaged stuff like proteins that build up in Alzheimer's. Sigma-1 activation is like a switch that helps boost this cleanup process. So the idea is Blackine helps cells clear out the gunk by activating this pathway.
Interesting. Helping the cell clean itself up. Okay, let's shift gears then. The other big program, Schizophrenia. That's ANAVEX371. What was the update there?
The main news was hitting a key milestone. It successfully completed enrollment in their phase 2 clinical study.
Enrollment complete. Great. When did that happen?
Just earlier this month.
How many people are in that study?
Total of 71 participants. It was split into 2 parts, A and B.
Okay.
16 in Part A, 55 in Part B.
And the difference between Part A and B?
Part A was done earlier. It was smaller, looked at different doses, mostly focused on safety over shorter time. They'd already reported some encouraging preliminary safety in EEG, biomarker stuff from that.
Right.
Part B is the bigger group, longer treatment, 28 days, 4 weeks.
And Part B is where we'll get the first real look at efficacy.
That's the idea. It's designed to give more comprehensive data, clinical outcomes, biomarkers, safety over that longer stretch. And they said top-line data from the whole study is expected in the second half of this year, H2 2025.
H225, okay, that's definitely a key catalyst to watch.
For sure, a big one.
They also made a point of saying this molecule, 371, is different from Blackine, right?
Yes, definitely emphasize that. It also hits the signal 1 receptor, but it's a completely different molecule, different chemical structure, different affinities. That's why it's being studied in schizophrenia, a totally different condition. Might have different effects.
And for this phase 2 study specifically, what's the main goal? What are they really trying to show?
Well, they said it's the first efficacy study for 371. But the primary focus, especially given these are hard-to-treat patients, is confirming safety over the longer duration and looking at the effect on EEG biomarkers.
EEG, brain activity.
Exactly. They mentioned EEG is validated as a potential biomarker in schizophrenia. So that could give objective evidence of the drug working, which can be tricky just looking at symptoms.
Makes sense.
And they also stress the focus on unmet need, particularly negative symptoms. Things like apathy, lack of motivation, notoriously hard to treat in schizophrenia.
Got it. Okay, let's move on to regulatory stuff. Commercial readiness. Europe first for Blackine. Where do things stand?
Okay, Europe. They submitted to the EMA back in November last year. It was accepted in December.
And the timeline for feedback. When might we hear something?
Based on typical review cycles, they're expecting feedback around the end of this year or possibly early next quarter. So roughly 12 months from submission.
Okay, end of 25, early 26 timeframe.
Right, but they were clear. They'll announce the final decision when they have it. No running commentary during the review.
Fair enough. Are they just waiting on that decision before thinking about selling it?
Oh, no, not at all. They said discussions on commercial readiness for Europe started back around the JP Morgan conference. They're already planning.
Planning what exactly? What are the options for launch?
2 main paths being explored. Either partner up with a big pharma company that already has the sales force and infrastructure in Europe, or potentially build their own European clinical sales team. They said the decision will come down to maximizing shareholder value. Goal is be ready to go if it gets approved.
And if it does get approved, say end of the year, how quickly could it actually reach patients?
It varies by country in Europe. Some places you can market literally the next day. Others need more agreements on timing, pricing, that sort of thing. But they said the logistics are being prepped now for a quick launch if possible.
And manufacturing. Ready to go?
Yeah, they mentioned it's handled by the largest U.S. manufacturer, and they have launch inventory prepared. No word on potential tariff impacts yet, though. Too early for that.
Okay. Now, one thing that really stood out on the call, thinking about practicalities, was the advantages they see for oral Blackine.
Yes, this was a key theme, tying back to that neurologist feedback.
Right. So what are the benefits they highlighted? For patients first.
For patients, the big one is timely access. Because it's a pill, there are no delays from needing complex diagnostics or procedures like lots of scans or spinal taps before starting treatment.
Unlike some other AD treatments.
Exactly. They contrasted it with antibodies, where it can apparently take 6 to 9 months from diagnosis to actually getting the drug. In that time, a patient's disease might progress, maybe even making them ineligible. With oral Blackine, the idea is quicker access, which is critical in AD.
Makes sense. What about for families, caregivers?
Less stress, less burden, logistically, and probably financially too. No need for constant trips to the hospital for infusions or MRIs or PT scans. It reduces the impact on family work schedules, the whole organizational headache.
Yeah, that's a huge factor. And for beaters, the system.
Simplicity again, fewer logistical hurdles for physicians. They don't need to arrange all those complex, sometimes invasive procedures just to get the treatment started or monitored in the same way. The goal is just easier for everyone involved.
And they really hammered home the importance of starting treatment quickly, didn't they?
They did. The message was clear. Delaying treatment could mean delaying or reducing the long-term benefit. It impacts the patient's ability to maintain a better quality of life. So get the drug started as soon as AD is identified.
Okay. Beyond Europe, any word on plans for other regions, UK, US?
Yes. They plan to start talks with regulators in the UK, Canada, and Australia in parallel this year.
In parallel. Okay.
And importantly, also talks with the FDA in the US, again, in parallel, not necessarily waiting for the European outcome first.
So potentially multiple submissions moving forward around the same time.
That seems to be the plan. They cautioned it's too early for specific timelines on those discussions, but they'll provide updates when there's something concrete.
And if they do get that EU approval, any knock-on effects?
Potentially, yeah. They mentioned EU approval could be leveraged in many other countries. South America, Africa, Middle East, parts of Asia. It could significantly broaden the reach if that first major approval comes through.
Interesting. And one last point on updates, they expanded their scientific advisory board.
Correct. Added Professor Dr. Audrey Gable back in April. Her specialty is predictive personalized medicine and digital health in AD. Suggests they're thinking about incorporating those aspects.
Right. Okay, let's pull back, connect the dots here. We've covered the cash, the pipeline, the regulatory timelines. What does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to understand the context?
Well, from an investor viewpoint, that solid 4-year cash runway is key. It gives them a long period to potentially hit several major milestones without needing to tap the markets for more cash right away.
And the biggest milestones, the catalyst discussed on this call that everyone will be watching.
I think the clearest near-term clinical catalyst is that top-line data from the phase 2 schizophrenia study, AVXL 371, expected in the second half of this year. That feels like a really big binary event.
Definitely. And the other critical one on the regulatory side.
That EMA feedback on Blackine for Alzheimer's, expected late this year or early next. Also huge.
And meanwhile, those planned talks with the UK, Canada, Australia, and importantly, the FDA this year, that's laying groundwork for the future.
Exactly. Potential future catalysts and market expansion down the road.
Plus, the fact they're already discussing commercial options for Europe partner or build shows they're thinking ahead, trying to be ready to maximize value if Blackine gets the green light.
And that whole narrative around the logistical advantages of Blackine, being oral, less burdensome, that could be a really powerful differentiator in the AD market if it's approved and that message resonates.
Okay. Now for our segment where we step away from just reporting and maybe entertain a slightly wild idea.
Yeah.
Remember, this is purely for illustration, absolutely not financial advice.
Definitely not. Investing is risky. Please do your own research, consult a professional.
Yeah.
But as a thought exercise.
Right. A thought exercise. You have this company, decent cash runway, but facing these massive, potentially stock-moving events, the schizophrenia data in H225, the EMA decision, maybe early 26. These are huge inflection points. How might someone purely theoretically position for just extreme volatility around those dates?
Well, one highly speculative strategy, and I stress speculative, might be what's called a long volatility play.
Long volatility.
Yeah. It could involve, say, buying a combination of out-of-the-money call options and out-of-the-money put options. It's known as a strangle.
Okay, a strangle. So you buy calls, betting the stock goes up, and puts, betting it goes down, both needing a big move to pay off.
Precisely. The idea isn't to predict the outcome of the data or the EMA decision. It's to bet that the outcome, whatever it is, will cause a dramatic stock price reaction, either soaring on good news or plummeting on bad news. You're betting on the size of the move, not the direction.
And why is this outrageous or wild?
The cost, mainly. Options pricing in that kind of uncertainty around binary events can be really expensive. You pay a hefty premium for both the calls and the puts, and if the stock doesn't move dramatically enough, if the news is just okay, or the market reaction is muted, then the stock price might not move past the strike prices plus the premium you paid.
Meaning you could lose the entire premium.
Exactly. You could lose everything you invested in those options. It's a pure bet on a massive price swing, divorced from the underlying fundamentals, except for their potential to cause that swing. So yeah, high risk, high cost, purely illustrative.
Got it. Duly noted. Again, not advice, just exploring possibilities based on the situation described in the call.
Agreed.
So, to wrap things up then, this deep dive into the Anavex call really shows a company with significant cash runway heading into some potentially transformative catalysts.
Yeah, we covered their financials, the positive long-term open-label data for Blackine and AD, the fact that enrollment's done for the schizophrenia phase 2, with data coming in H2, and all the regulatory and commercial prep work happening, especially for Europe.
Key things for you to keep on your radar. Definitely that schizophrenia data later this year and the timing around the EMA's feedback on Blackine.
And just a final reminder, everything we've talked about today comes straight from the company's earnings call commentary. It's for your information, to help you understand what they said. It is absolutely not investment advice.
Well, you really hope this deep dive helped you quickly get the signal from the Anavex call. Now, as a final thought to leave you with, considering everything discussed about Blackine's potential ease of use and the multi-region regulatory strategy, what are perhaps the biggest unspoken hurdles or market challenges that could still arise, even if the drug gets approved? Something beyond the data and the filings. What real-world factors might still play a major role? Something to chew on.